Welcome to the sleep paralysis tapes. Settle into the dark, pull the covers close, and let the heavy silence fill your room. Tonight, we descend into chilling tales of the unexplained. Before the screen fades to pitch black, I invite you to become part of this archive. If you have your own terrifying encounters, please contact me and I will narrate your story in a future tape. If these shadows bring you comfort, please like, subscribe, and tap the bell. Now, close your eyes. Do not look at the foot of your bed. Just listen and let us begin. It started, as so many bad things do, with a routine job, a simple task. The kind of thing you do with the window open and a cup of coffee going cold beside you. Mark Thorne was a freelance audio engineer. He worked out of his second-floor apartment on North Kenmore Avenue in Chicago. His world was one of quiet, technical precision. His tools were an old, well-maintained analog tape deck, a high-end digital audio workstation, and a pair of studio monitors that cost more than his car. His job was to take old recordings and make them sound new again, to polish time. The client was Vinyl Vault, a reissue label with a taste for obscure jazz. The album was Midnight Solitude, a 1974 session by pianist Arlo Finch. A cult classic. Quiet, introspective, beautiful. The master tapes had been shipped to Mark in a sturdy flight case. They smelled of old cardboard and the faint, sweet chemical scent of magnetic oxide. The smell of the past. Mark's process was methodical. He'd play the original 2-inch tape on his deck, converting it to a high-resolution digital file. Then he'd work inside the computer. He used a program called iZotope RX. It's a powerful tool that lets you see sound. A spectral display shows you every frequency, every pop, every hiss, like a topographical map of noise. You can pluck out a single cough from a live recording. You can erase the rumble of a passing truck without touching the music. It's a form of audio archaeology. On the third day, he opened the solo piano track titled Nocturne. It was the album's centerpiece. Just Arlo Finch and his piano in a studio, late at night. The recording was pristine, but quiet. The very quietness was the problem. In the spaces between the soft notes, the natural tape hiss was more noticeable. That was Mark's job today, to gently lower that hiss without harming the music. He loaded Nocturne into the spectral view. The piano notes appeared as elegant, vertical streaks of color against a gray field of ambient noise. He zoomed in on a quiet passage. He was looking for the hiss, the clicks, the imperfections. He was cleaning a window, 48 years after the picture was taken, and that's when he saw it. It wasn't a click. It wasn't random hiss. In the 300 to 800 hertz range, the heart of the human voice, there was a faint, smeared blur of signal. It ran like a pale, thin river underneath the piano's own harmonics. It was coherent. It had a pattern. It was completely separate from the music. Mark leaned back in his chair. He sipped his now cold coffee. He wasn't alarmed, not yet. In this line of work, you see ghosts in the machine all the time. This was probably tape bleed. Sometimes, if a reel of tape is stored poorly, the magnetic information from one layer can imprint faintly onto the next. It creates a ghost of a sound. Or maybe it was an artifact from the original studio mixing board. A hum recorded by accident. He'd seen it before. He'd fixed it before. It was part of the job. He selected the area and isolated it. He told the software to amplify just that narrow band of frequencies, to bring it up from the noise floor so he could hear what this ghost actually was. Then he could decide how to remove it. He clicked play. What came out of his speakers wasn't music. It wasn't a hum. It wasn't the whisper of tape bleed. It was a voice. Faint. Distant. Buried under almost 50 years of magnetic decay and the much louder sound of a piano. But it was unmistakably a human voice. A whisper, thread thin and laced with static. It said a single, clear word. A name. Mark's hand froze, the coffee cup halfway to his desk. The room, which a moment before had been a familiar cocoon of technology and comfort, felt different. The air got still. The gentle hum of his computer tower seemed to grow louder. He stared at the spectral display. The blur of signal now looked like a message, like something that had been waiting. He should have stopped. A reasonable person, a person who valued their peace of mind, would have closed the session. They would have written it off as a bizarre studio accident. A prank. A glitch. But Mark Thorne was an engineer. His world was built on signals and noise, on cause and effect. A voice on a master tape was a problem to be solved. A curiosity to be examined. He moved the cursor. He isolated a longer section. He amplified it again, applying more processing this time, trying to clarify the sound. He clicked play. And this is where it gets bad. It wasn't just one voice, it was two. A man and a woman. They were whispering, talking over each other, frantic. The piano notes from Nocturne swelled and faded above them, a beautiful, tragic soundtrack to a conversation they were never meant to have. He could only make out fragments. The processing wasn't perfect, but the tone was clear. It was fear. It was urgency. The woman's voice, thin and strained, said, "Not here. We can't leave it." The man's voice, lower, cut her off. He said, "The trunk, just get in the trunk." A pause. Then the woman again, a sob breaking through the whisper. She said, Is it still moving?" Mark Thorne sat alone in his second-floor apartment on North Kenmore Avenue. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, and he listened to a crime being whispered about on a jazz master tape from 1974. He told himself, of course, that it was nothing. A radio picked up by a faulty cable. Actors on a TV in the next studio. His own mind, tired from hours of focused work, playing tricks. He almost believed it. But he saved the isolated audio file. He named it Nocturne Hospe Wong. And he didn't delete it. He just sat there in the new silence of his own studio. And he knew the job was no longer routine. The past was no longer quiet. And the window he was cleaning, he was starting to see something moving on the other side of the glass. Mark didn't sleep well that night. The whisper played in his head, a loop he couldn't stop. The next morning, with a fresh cup of coffee and a deliberate sense of normalcy, he went back to work. But not to the remaster. He went back to the ghost. He opened the isolated file and brought up the spectral display again. This time, he didn't just amplify. He got surgical. He used a tool called a spectral denoise. It's like using a microscope on sound. You can target a specific type of noise, like tape hiss, and subtract it from the recording. That leaves only what's behind. He was going to clean the window and see what was really on the other side. He applied the process. The constant, grainy static of the tape itself faded away. What remained was clearer. Not perfect. Still smeared by time. But clearer. He listened. And this is where you need to understand something about old recording technology. On a reel of tape, sound is laid down in a linear track, one after the other. If you have two sounds recorded at the same time, they blend. They become one signal. But these whispers, they weren't blending with the piano. They were separate. They existed in their own space on the magnetic tape. That meant they could have been recorded at a different time. Maybe even on a different day. Mark checked the studio logs vinyl Balt had sent him. They were photocopies of handwritten sheets from Prairie Sun Studios. August 22nd, 1974. Session for Midnight Solitude. The track listing included Nocturne. The personnel listed Arlo Finch on piano. The engineer was Frank Dernberger. No other names. No mention of a second session. No mention of any other recording on that reel. Just a man and his piano late at night. But the voices were there, underneath the notes. He listened again with the cleaned-up audio. He turned up the volume on his studio monitors. The piano was gone. Only the whispers remained. A man's voice, tight with stress, said, "The deal's done. Just follow the plan." A woman's voice, shaking, answered, I can't do this again." The man said, "We have to. We have to. No one will check there. It's perfect. A long pause. Then the woman, her voice dropping to a thread of sound, asked, Is it still moving? The man took a sharp intake of breath. Don't look. Just get in the car. Another pause, filled only with the faint sound of their breathing. Then the woman, a sob breaking through, said, The body in the trunk, it's not right. Mark's hand was on the mouse. He didn't move. The words hung in the air of his studio. The body in the trunk. Not right. A reasonable person would have stopped here. They would have closed the file, deleted it, called the client, and said there was a technical glitch. But Mark wasn't just reasonable. He was an engineer. And engineers follow signals. He had a thought. A terrible logical thought. If the whispers were on the tape before Arlo Finch played his piano, then they weren't recorded during the jazz session. They were already there. They were on the tape when the engineer loaded it into the machine. They were baked into the medium itself. That meant the tape had a memory. A memory of something else. He went back to the spectral view and looked at the timeline. The whispers ran underneath the entire 3-minute track of Nocturne. They were a constant, secret parallel track to the beautiful music. A hidden story playing out beneath the melody. He isolated a section near the end of the piece. He amplified it further, pushing the software to its limits, stretching the damaged audio until it almost broke. The man's voice came through, clearer than before, but distorted, like a face seen through cracked glass. Just drive. North. Keep driving. Don't stop until I say. Then a sound that wasn't a voice. A low, mechanical thump, a hollow echo, and the woman, her whisper now barely audible, just a breath shaped into words, said, It's humming. The recording ended. The piano's last note faded into the hiss, and the whispers faded with it. Mark sat in his chair. The sun was high now, bright against the blinds. His studio was warm. But he felt cold. He tried the rationalizations again. A radio pickup. A prank. Actors. But the content, the specificity, the body in the trunk. The deal. The humming. It wasn't drama. It was panic. It was real fear, captured in a whisper. And it was on a master tape for a jazz album. A tape that, according to the logs, should have been new, blank, and silent before Arlo Finch sat down to play. Mark saved the new, cleaned-up file. He didn't name it. He just saved it. Then he did something else. He opened his browser. He searched for Prairie Sun Studios. He searched for Frank Dernberger. He found a phone number, an old listing for Frank Dernberger in Oak Park, just outside Chicago. He looked at the number. He looked at the clock. He picked up his phone. He had to know. He had to ask. What kind of tape was used at Prairie Sun Studios in 1974? And what, exactly, was on it before the music began? The phone rang for a long time. Mark listened to it, his heart beating a little too fast in the quiet of his studio. He was about to hang up when a voice answered. It was old and thin, with the patient tone of someone who isn't surprised by calls anymore. Frank Dernberger agreed to meet. He suggested a diner in Oak Park, a place he said hadn't changed its pie since the 70s. 2 days later, Mark sat across from him in a red vinyl booth. A tape recorder sat between them on the Formica table. Mark had told Frank it was for his own notes, to ensure historical accuracy for the reissue liner notes. It wasn't entirely a lie. Frank was in his late 70s. He had kind eyes behind thick glasses, and hands that still looked steady, like a man who'd threaded miles of magnetic tape. He was happy to talk about Prairie Sun. He described the smell of the console and the warm glow of the tube amplifiers. He spoke of the musicians who passed through. He spoke of Arlo Finch with genuine fondness. Frank said, he was a quiet man, played like he was whispering secrets to the piano. That Nocturne track was one take. Perfect. We all just sat there after, like we'd witnessed something. Mark nodded and sipped his coffee. He let the nostalgia flow, and he waited. When Frank slowed, Mark leaned forward. He said, I have to ask you about something technical. His voice was calm, an engineer asking an engineer. While I was cleaning up Nocturne, I found something. An anomaly on the spectral display. Frank's eyebrows went up. A ghost? Something like that, Mark said. He took out his laptop and opened the audio file. He didn't play it yet. It's in the 300 to 800 hertz range, a separate signal underneath the piano. Frank's expression shifted. The fond reminiscence faded, replaced by a technician's focus. And maybe something else. A wariness. He said, bleed. But it sounded like a hope, not a diagnosis. I thought so too, Mark said. But it's coherent. It's voices, Frank. He saw the old man's shoulders tense just slightly. Frank tried to hide it by reaching for his coffee cup. Mark continued. I isolated them and brought them up. He looked Frank in the eye. They're talking about something bad. A crime. They mention a body in a trunk. Frank's cup clicked against the saucer. He looked down at his hands. The diner's noise seemed to recede. The clatter of plates and the low hum of conversation faded, leaving just the two of them in a bubble of awful silence. Mark said, Frank, what kind of tape did you use at Prairie Sun? The old man didn't look up. He let out a long, slow breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. The warmth was gone. It was flat and tired. He said, we used what we could afford. Studio tape is expensive. New reels add up, especially for a small outfit like we were. He looked out the window at the traffic. Early 70s, maybe 1972 or 73, the owner found a cheap source. The Cook County Sheriff's Office. They'd have surplus auctions. They'd sell off old equipment and evidence, all sorts of things. Mark felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He knew what was coming. Frank said, still not looking at Mark. They had tape. Lots of it. Reels and reels. Used, of course. But the listing said, professionally erased. It was a bulk price, a fraction of the cost of new stock. He finally turned his gaze back. It was full of a deep, old regret. We bought cases of it. It was supposed to be clean and white, ready for music. Mark just stared at him. Evidence tape? Frank gave a single, slow nod. Interrogation rooms, interview recordings, wiretaps, who knows? They said it was white. He repeated it, like he was trying to convince himself of a 40-year-old fact. They said it was white. Mark pushed the laptop closer. Do you want to hear it? Frank Dernberger went pale. He shook his head with a quick, sharp motion. No, he said. I don't. But Mark needed him to understand. He needed confirmation. He hit play, keeping the volume low, just loud enough for the two of them to hear over the diner's noise. A whispered conversation spilled from the speakers. A man's tense instructions, a woman's sobbing fear. She said, the body in the trunk, it's not right. Frank listened. He didn't move. He seemed to shrink into the red vinyl booth. His eyes were fixed on a sugar packet on the table, but he wasn't seeing it. He was somewhere else. In a studio control room 48 years ago, loading a reel of tape that smelled faintly of police station dust. When the audio clip ended, the old man was silent for a full minute. The color hadn't returned to his face. Mark prompted softly, Frank? The technician looked at him. His eyes were wide and haunted. He spoke in a voice so quiet Mark had to lean in to catch it. Frank whispered again. They said it was white. But tape has a memory. He looked down at his hands, which were now clasped tightly together on the table. His knuckles were white. He said, sometimes things stick. The words hung in the air between them. They weren't a technical explanation. They were a confession, an admission of a sin he hadn't known he was committing until now, decades later, in a diner booth. Mark didn't know what to say. The rational part of his brain wanted to ask about bulk erasers and magnetic fields, about the science of degaussing. But the man sitting across from him had just heard a ghost from his own past. He had moved beyond science. He was in the realm of guilt. Frank pushed his coffee cup away. He looked old and very, very tired. He said, almost to himself, "I never listened." You load the tape. You check for tone. You make sure the levels are good. You don't listen to the silence. He stood up, his movements stiff. He left a $10 bill under his saucer. He said to Mark, "I'm sorry." It wasn't clear what he was apologizing for. For the secret, for the crime on the tape, or for pulling Mark into it. Then he turned and walked out of the diner. He left Mark alone with the laptop, the half-finished coffee, and the terrible, echoing truth. The tape had a memory, and Mark had just played it back. Mark drove back from Oak Park in a daze. The city passed by his windows, bright and normal. But inside the car, the only sound was the echo of Frank Dernberger's voice. The tape has a memory. Back in his studio, the afternoon light was fading. The flight case with the master tapes sat open on a side table. It didn't look like a piece of history anymore. It looked like an evidence locker. He didn't make coffee. He didn't put on music. He just sat down and opened the file. The one with the whispers. He stared at the spectral display, that map of someone else's terror. Frank's confession changed everything. This wasn't a random radio signal. It wasn't a prank. This was a recording of something that happened. It was evidence, and it had been recorded over, buried, but not erased. A reasonable person would have stopped here. They would have taken the file to the police and closed the laptop. But Mark was an engineer. An engineer sees a signal and wants to know its source, its full shape. He looked at the whisper track. He pulled it up from the noise. But what was beneath it? What lived in the deeper silence, under the fear? He selected the entire isolated track, the one with the man and the woman. He told the software to invert it. This is a trick in audio. You can tell the program to find everything that sounds like that and remove it. You subtract the known signal to see what's left behind. He was going to filter out the whispers. He set the parameters to target the specific frequency profile of those two voices, to strip them away. It was like carefully scraping away a layer of paint, hoping to find the original wall underneath. The software processed it. A progress bar crept along. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of his computer fan. He realized he was holding his breath. The process finished. He was left with a new audio file, a visual representation of absolute quiet, almost a flat line, but not quite. Because down there, in the sub-audible range, below 100 Hz, there was something else. A faint, rhythmic pulse. A vibration. It wasn't a voice. It was too low, too muffled. It looked like a slow, dying heartbeat. Mark leaned in. He amplified it. He pushed the gain until the waveform filled the screen. He applied another layer of noise reduction, this one designed for low-frequency rumble. He was cleaning a window again. But this time, the window was at the bottom of a well. He hit play. The sound from his speakers was a physical thing, a low, resonant thump. Then another, a slow, irregular rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. It was muffled, dull. It had the acoustic quality of a sound inside a metal box. A car trunk. And beneath the thumping there was a hum. A literal, tonal hum. A single, sustained note wavering slightly. His skin went cold. This was worse than the whispers. The whispers were people talking about a thing. This was the thing itself. The audio of the crime scene. He went further. He had to. He applied a spectral filter, carving out everything except that wavering hum. He amplified it until it distorted, until it was all he could hear. He clicked play again. The hum resolved. It wasn't just a tone anymore. It was a voice, a human voice, humming a melody. Faint, strained, choked. The voice was trapped in the same acoustic space as the thumping, that small enclosed metal room. It was a man's voice. Or maybe a woman's. It was hard to tell through the distortion and the terror. The humming was slow, halting. Like someone trying to remember a tune to keep themselves calm, to keep from screaming. Mark listened, his heart hammering against his ribs. The melody was familiar. It was simple. A few notes rising and falling. He played it again. And then, in a moment of pure horror, his brain made the connection. He opened the original, clean version of Arlo Finch's Nocturne. He let it play, the beautiful piano notes filling the room. He listened to the main refrain, the simple, haunting theme that defined the piece. He stopped it. He played the isolated, distorted hum from the sub-audible track. It was the same sequence of notes. Slower, off-key. Sung by a voice thick with panic. But it was unmistakable. The person in the trunk, the person who was, according to the whispers, not right, was humming the central melody from Nocturne. A piece of music that wouldn't be composed, wouldn't be recorded, wouldn't exist for another few years. The air in Mark's studio turned to ice. He looked from his screen to the flight case holding the master tape, a tape that had been recycled, a tape that had a memory. And in its deepest, darkest layer, beneath the panic of the conspirators, someone had been humming a song from the future. He sat back. The rational part of his mind, the engineer, shattered. There was no explanation for this. No radio interference, no studio spill, no prank could account for it. The only explanation was the one he could feel in the cold pit of his stomach. The tape hadn't just remembered a crime. It had remembered something else. Something that bled through time. The humming stopped on the recording. The last thump echoed into silence. In the quiet of his own room, Mark Thorne realized he was listening to the last sounds a person ever made. And that person had been humming a lullaby that didn't exist yet. Mark did not sleep at all that night. He sat in his studio chair until the sun came up, staring at the flat line on his spectral display. The silence after the humming stopped. He had listened to the end of something. He was sure of it. And he had to do something. The engineer in him took over. He needed order and reason. He compiled everything into a folder. He put in the original audio file, the isolated whispers, and the sub-audible track with the humming and the thumping. He wrote a detailed report. He included Frank Dernberger's statement about the recycled police tape. He laid out the timeline and the facts as he knew them. It was clean and professional. He sent it to his contact at Final Vault first. The response came within hours. It wasn't from his contact. It was from a senior director. The email was polite but firm. They were deeply concerned by the findings. They advised him, for his own well-being and the project's integrity, to stop all further investigation. They had located a safety copy of the master tape, a clone made in the 80s. He was to use that for the Nocturne track. They thanked him for his diligence, enclosed a bonus payment, and stressed that any public discussion of this anomaly would be a breach of contract. They were not a detective agency. They were a record label. The message was clear. Bury it. Mark printed the email. He added it to his folder. Then he wrote a new, shorter report and submitted it to the Chicago Police Department's online tip line. He listed it as a possible historical crime with audio evidence. A week later, a detective from Area 3 called. His voice was tired, worn thin by 1,000 tips. He listened as Mark explained. Mark's words tumbled out in a rush about the trunk, the body, and the recycled tape. There was a long pause on the line. Mark could hear a keyboard clicking softly. "Mr. Thorne," the detective said, his tone flat. "I've read your submission. We appreciate you sending it in." "So you'll look into it?" Mark asked, his hand tight around the phone. Another pause. "Sir, what we have here is an audio file of unknown origin. You have no case number, no date beyond a possible decade, no victim name, no location. You have a retired studio technician saying they bought used tape, which isn't a crime. The audio itself, it could be anything. A radio play. A hoax. Without a frame of reference, it's inadmissible. It's non-actionable. But the content, Mark started, is disturbing, I greg you, the detective interrupted, not unkindly. But my job isn't to investigate scary sounds. It's to investigate crimes. With evidence. With leads. I have a stack of active cases on my desk right now with real names and real dates. I'm sorry. The call ended. Mark sat with the phone in his hand, listening to the dial tone. The system, the rational world he had appealed to, had looked at his folder of horrors and shrugged. It had filed it away under nothing to be done. He finished the remaster. He used the clone tape for Nocturne. The process, once a meditation in precision, was now a tense and watchful act. Every time he loaded an old tape onto his deck, he flinched at the smell. That sweet chemical scent of the past now smelled like a warning. He found himself unable to just listen. He would thread the tape, hit play, and his eyes would immediately snap to the spectral display on his screen. He would watch the rolling landscape of sound. His heart beat a little faster in the quiet passages, in the silences between the notes. He was looking for ghosts in the grey, for whispers in the static. He'd become an audio archaeologist, yes. But he was no longer digging for music. He was digging for graves. The Vinyl Vault reissue of Midnight Solitude was released 6 months later to critical acclaim. Reviewers praised the clarity, the warmth, and the respectful restoration. One called it definitive. Mark received his final payment. He bought a new set of studio monitors. Life moved on. But in his apartment on North Kenmore Avenue, something had changed. The silence had a texture now. It felt less like an absence of sound and more like a held breath. He kept the folder. He never opened it again, but he knew it was there, on an external drive in a drawer. A closed case with no case number. A solved mystery with no solution. And sometimes, late at night, when the city outside was quiet and the only sound was the faint hum of his own refrigerator, he would think he heard something else. Not a whisper. Not a thump. Just a feeling. A pressure in the air. Like the room was remembering something he tried to forget. I wish I could tell you he deleted the files. I wish I could tell you he moved apartments, or switched to only digital work, or found some kind of peace. But he didn't. He still does analog remasters, he's very good at it, but now his first step with any tape at all is to run a deep spectral scan. He looks for signals in the silence, for patterns in the noise. He's looking for the memory in the tape, because he knows now that it's not just magnetic oxide on polyester film. It's a layer cake of time. Music on top. Then panic. Then underneath it all, in the dark, a hum that knows a song from the future. And if you're listening to this, in the dark, with your own thoughts for company, you understand now, don't you? The past isn't a story. It's not a recording. It's an unerased place. And sometimes, if you listen too closely to the silence, you can hear it humming back. The tape has reached its end. I hope the stories tonight brought a pleasant chill to your spine as you drifted further into the dark. Thank you for braving the shadows here at the Sleep Paralysis tapes. If you are still awake, lying still in the quiet, remember to contact me with your own unsettling encounters so they can be added to our growing archive. As my voice fades away, let the silence of your room wrap around you completely. May your sleep be undisturbed, your doors remain locked, and your morning arrive safely. Until we open the tapes again, good night.